Okay, hello. Welcome to the Adoptee Literary Festival 2025. I'm Alice Stevens, co-director of the festival, along with the fabulous Susan Ito, who you can see on the screen, and co-founder, along with incredible board member Marcy Calabretto Cancio Bello. Huge appreciation to them, along with mighty board members Mariama Lockington and Sarah Easterly. Thanks also to Kim Sue Stevens, lead fundraiser, Shelby Kilgore, director of the Sizzle Reel, Shelley Gasky, webmaster, and Zoom tech, Carrie Bondi. Thanks to you, the audience, we have over 300 registrants proving the need in our community for this event. This has been an enormous labor of love requiring many, many volunteer hours. We have given this event our all, but please give us grace if everything does not run to expectations. We're doing the best we possibly can.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Ito, and I just wanted to give a huge thanks to Alice and the rest of our amazing team for pulling this event together. We're so proud. We have over 300 registrants, which really is so exciting for all of us. In order to keep this an all adoptee event, we have solicited donations from adoptee-run organizations only. So we want to show some great appreciation to our top supporters, Adoptee Voices, Adoptees On, Adoption Mosaic, ICA, and the Inclusion Initiative, who all do essential work for our communities in their own unique ways. So please check out these organizations and what they have to offer and support them as well. Their links should be in the chat. And we'd also like to thank our individual donors. Through all of your combined generosity, we're able to offer a modest honorarium to each of our presenters in appreciation of their time and labor. If you feel so moved, please donate to us and them through Venmo at Adoptee Lit Fest. Again, that's Adoptee Lit Fest at Venmo. And we also really want to thank our fabulous bookstore, adoptee-owned Loyalty Bookstore. Please support our authors, buy their books, and we have a dedicated page that includes everyone's books together. So you can browse that and buy all the books. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful festival.
Thank you, Susan. So, without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Shannon Gibney. With her long history of writing and speaking about the complexities of adoption, Shannon is a vital force in the adoptee literary community. Author of children's books, YA historical fiction, essays, novels, and a sui generis speculative memoir, Shannon is also an editor, an academic, and social justice activist. Her award-winning books include The Girl I Am, Was, and Never Will Be, a speculative memoir of transracial adoption. A Bush Artist and McKnight Writing Fellow, Gibney teaches at Minneapolis College, where she was named Educator of the Year in 2023. See her full bio in the chat.
Thank you. I think it's going to be a great day. Before we get started, my name is Shannon Gibney, by the way, and I'm your fearless keynote. I just have to thank Susan, Alice, Mariama, Sarah, Carrie, and I'm so sorry I'm leaving key people out, but this is an amazing endeavor. It's something that I have wanted for most of my life, if not all of my life, and it's all volunteer run. So I cannot thank folks enough for that. So, as has been explored elsewhere, the dominant discourse of adoption is that it is an act of quote unquote humanitarian rescue, that it is a valid way for mostly middle class to rich white couples to build their families, that there is no real loss involved for the child being given up or the parents relinquishing them, that the actions of adoptive parents are fundamentally selfless in nature. So any adoptee who is not sufficiently grateful for their new economic and education upward mobility is defective. And I say this differently in a micro essay in my novel memoir collage, The Girl I Am, Was, and Never Will Be. So this is a short excerpt. The literature of adoption is a fictional genre in itself. Adoptees know it to be generally as fantastical as any space opera and just as entertaining to the masses. Every story must begin with the vulnerable but good-hearted poor birth mother who loves her baby very much but cannot take care of it. The birth father is always conspicuously absent in these narratives. There is a kindly upper middle class, usually white couple who desperately wants a child and have pursued all avenues in order to get one. If the couple is adopting internationally, they are in a rich country in the global north and have spent years on various lists waiting for an available child, many times spending thousands of dollars. They fight, despite all odds, to build their family through adoption, in the process creating a healthy, happy, thriving child who eventually grows into a healthy, happy, thriving adult who has bonded perfectly with their new colorblind family. All this miraculous transformation from a poor brown cast-off orphan. Love conquers all. Once the birth mother has given up the child, she is no longer part of the story. Once the child is adopted, there is no talk of loss of first family, culture, language, or community. The adoption is simply a bureaucratic event that happened and then is over. Since the birth father was not part of the story from the beginning, he is not part of the adoptee story as it progresses. And if you ask about any of the particularities of this literature of adoption, who is adopting whom, from where to where, what are the racial dynamics of the transaction, the role that money plays, corruption, the trauma of removal, the burden of assimilation, you are branded an angry and maladjusted adoptee. When most of the literature written about a marginalized group of people comes from white adoptive parents who are psychologists, sociologists, creative writers, and professors who don't identify themselves as adoptive parents in their quote unquote objective work, what other possible outcome could there be? This is how I came to understand epistemological violence in my body. In the last 5 years or so, however, we've seen an explosion of both literature and journalism that engages with adoption and adoptees differently. And here I'm thinking of the carefully constructed Frontline documentary and AP series last year on corruption in Korean adoption, and the many stories on the decline of the international adoption industry. The literature authored by transracial and BIPOC adoptees in particular has busted open prevailing assumptions in the most beautiful ways, challenging readers' binary thinking about adoption and forcing them to confront the structural forces which create orphans in the first place, and the adoption industry, which then becomes positioned as the best option to solve this human-created problem. In short, the existential dilemma of being created as a human in this way is on full display in these works, which span genres from graphic novels to anthologies to memoirs to general nonfiction to scholarly monographs to genre benders. In 2019, Lisa Wollrim Sujblom, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing her last name correctly, but I'm privileged to be on a panel with directly following this keynote, published Palimpsest Documents from a Korean Adoption, and that was published by Drawn and Quarterly. Sujblom, a Korean-Swedish adoptee, details her difficult and largely painful journey of trying to find biological family in Korea and/or any clear information on the circumstances surrounding her birth and relinquishment. The book does a masterful job of showing the corruption endemic to the transnational adoption industrial complex, as Dr. Kimberly McKee calls it, and the devastating human toll this can take on the adoptee. Published last year, Monstrous, a transracial adoption story, is another powerful graphic novel by a Korean adoptee, this time negotiating the trauma of not belonging as a teenager in her conservative rural white town. Author Sarah Myers, also on the Doubles and the Ghost Kingdom panel following this keynote, deftly illustrates how the violence directed at one's body from outside can swiftly take up residence inside one's body if it cannot be acknowledged or processed, and of the monstrous nature of being othered in this way. After I bought the book at the 2023 Cannes conference, my then 13-year-old son immediately stole it from me and read it quickly on the drive home. I picked it up once we were home and completed it just as quickly. We were then able to discuss some of the questions and concerns Meyer brings up in the book, including if it is ever appropriate to respond to harassment with violence and how one might feel being the only person of color in their family and one of the only in their school. The book gave us context and a place to enter these conversations that was imaginative and safe and effectively bridged the gap between Gen X and Gen Alpha readers. Several general nonfiction books that feature themes of adoption prominently have made a big splash in adoptee communities and beyond in the past 3 years. Angela Tucker's You Should Be Grateful, Stories of Race, Identity, and Transracial Adoption was published by Beacon Press in 2022. Tucker, a Black transracial adoptee, public speaker, mentor to young adoptees, and advisor of adoption policy, mixes her personal story of growing up in a white household with other transracially adopted children in Seattle, her search for an eventual reunion with her Black birth mother and father, with the social history of adoption policy and child removal from Black families. At the end of one chapter, Tucker says, "It occurred to me that my adoption was likely caught in the crosshairs of these governmental strategies." And here she means the war on poverty in the 1960s, the war on drugs in the 1980s, the Family Preservation and Family Support Services Program of 1993. She continues, "I began to realize that the matrix that involves the development of punitive policies across several systems penalizes Black mothers and reinforces the state's control over their bodies, and by proxy, mine." Tucker uses stories from the adoptee youth she mentors to help make her points about the need for the adoption industry and all members of the adoption triad to embrace the lifelong, layered experience of adoption. Coining the term soundosphere from John Coyne's Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, Tucker writes, "The soundosphere is a realm where every person in an adoptee's life has a place, where birth parents and adoptive parents and biological aunties and foster parents and adoptive cousins all exist together. I chose to build on Koenig's brilliant word because of the way it expresses a deep and intimate type of empathy that, I believe, could revolutionize the way adoptive parents see their child's birth family. Instead of giving in to our oldest and basest us versus them mentality, Sonder calls us into our more advanced neurological expansiveness. It calls us to see the humans around us as complete, complex individuals with inner depths as vast as meaningful as our own. In the Sounder sphere, adoptees, their adoptive parents, and their biological parents build genuine relationships that embrace all the complexity." In the follow-up to her well-received and best-selling 2018 memoir, All You Can Know, Korean adoptee Nicole Chung released her sophomore solo book, A Living Remedy, in 2023. Primarily a personal exploration of the way that class and the medical industry intersect to overdetermine poor health and life expectancy for lower-class Americans like her parents, A Living Remedy also contains poignant passages on Chung's experience coming into her racial identity in college, across the country from her parents, and the white hamlet she grew up in, and the failure of the colorblind narrative to protect her from racists or to help her grow into a full sense of herself. She writes, "My family had been instructed to take a colorblind approach to parenting. Assimilate her into your family," the judge who finalized my adoption had told them. "Make her more like you, and everything will be fine." They heard similar advice from their attorney and social workers. "Throughout my childhood, I often struggled to understand myself as Korean in part because my white family, encouraged by such experts, did not see my race or theirs as relevant within our household or outside it. I cannot recall a single conversation we had about anti-Asian prejudice, specifically, not the model minority myth, not the perpetual foreigner syndrome, not the exotification and fetishization of Asian women, not the legacy of America's imperialist wars that was partly responsible for my birth families and my presence here. The closest we came to talking about race when I was a child was my parents' assertion that they would have adopted me whether I was Black, white, or purple with polka dots. As a child, I was too confused and ashamed to tell them about the ongoing racism I experienced, the slurs and taunts from kids, the prying and thoughtless comments from adults. I was trying to protect both them and myself. I didn't know how to explain to them that the colorblindness they claimed to espouse did not reflect reality as I knew it, that our experiences and views differed in part because I was Asian and they were not. I could no more make them understand how it felt to be a Korean adoptee than they could transfer their whiteness to me. Japanese American same-race adoption is not an experience we hear about often in popular culture or American letters. But Susan Ito, who, as you know, is also one of our wonderful lead organizers of this festival, tackles it beautifully in her debut memoir, I Would Meet You Anywhere, which also came out in 2023. Although she feels secure growing up in her loving Japanese American adoptive family, Ito makes it clear in the book that she still felt out of place being half white, and that she longed to understand where she came from and have relationships with her biological parents. As a mixed race adoptee, it was powerful for me to see this rendered on the page. In a scene where she's trying to learn how to make origami cranes, Ito writes, I told myself, I am going to make this crane. Why hadn't my parents taught me how to do this? I was going to pull the skill to do this out of my blood, make it flow into my fingers. But what if I couldn't? I would only prove the thing that I feared most, that I wasn't really Japanese, that I was an imposter, a fake, watered down, inauthentic Kmart version of the real thing. I wondered if Mika, who is her half-sister from her biological mother, wrestled with this, if she ever felt like she was not Japanese enough. Did it feel differently for her growing up with a Japanese mother and a white father? Was there less pressure? I wondered what it had been like for her to have mirrors on each side of her heritage. The memoir is also one of the few out there that shows the longitudinal effects of reunion through time and different phases of an adoptee's life, as it documents more than 40 years of contact with Ito's birth mother. The layered and often fraught relationship between adoptee and birth mother is on full display in the book, as the priorities of each sometimes overlap and often don't. Given the dearth of multifaceted reunion stories, this is significant. I prayed that we would really bond this time and that I wouldn't step on her emotional landmines, Ito writes. Talking about my birth father was off limits. If she mentioned her children, I could listen, but it was unacceptable for me to ask questions. It was an elaborate game of don't ask, don't tell, don't wonder or probe. Just wait and let her call every shot. I Would Meet You Anywhere was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist. Although she is not an adoptee, I include Gretchen Sisson's Relinquished, The Politics of Adoption and the Privilege of American Motherhood in this literature review because of its unprecedented inclusion of predominantly BIPOC adoptee literary and scholarly voices in her trenchant volume. I could not quite express what a thrill it was to see the work and words of Kimberly McKee, Jane John Trenka, Susan Harness, Nicole Chung, Angela Tucker, Susan Branco, Jae-Ron Kim, Liz Raleigh, Liz Lottie, and other longtime creative writers, activists, and critical adoption studies scholars deployed as evidence and argument in a general nonfiction book like this. Sisson, a white woman sociologist at University of California, San Francisco, has assembled a truly singular collection of relinquishing mothers' recollections. Shortly after relinquishment, and then 10 years later, alongside devastating facts and analyses of how the adoption industry targets vulnerable poor women. Sisson demonstrates how dominant discourses of adoption disenfranchise birth mothers, adoptees, and women everywhere who deserve true reproductive justice in their everyday lives. She writes, "There are many things about adoption that preserve the conservative values and inequities on which adoption is premised, and that ultimately do not serve those most impacted by adoption. The history of adoption is essential to understand because it has never gone away. Instead, the social forces that have always shaped family separation and the market forces that have incentivized adoption have become increasingly intertwined. Family regulation systems, under the guise of child welfare, both punish and oppress poor families and families of color, and also make children available for adoption. Private adoption systems are motivated to increase the supply of adoptable infants, and they do so by marginalizing vulnerable families and allowing relinquishment to be the only path forward." Published this time last year, the book has received a wide range of attention, from mainstream media outlets to small adoptee organizations, to birth parent communities, to feminist circles, to scholarly circles, to everyday readers of general nonfiction. The past 2 years have also seen the publication of important scholarly monographs on critical adoption studies by academics who are also adoptees. Kimberly D. McKee introduces her project quite clearly in the introduction of Adoption Fantasies, the fetishization of Asian adoptees from girlhood to womanhood, which was released in late 2023. This section is aptly titled, "The Limits of Multiculturalism." Adoption Fantasies recognizes how transnational, transracial adoption is not just a tool of white supremacy to effectively manage racial difference in a palatable manner through rescue under the auspices of racial liberalism and multiculturalism. Transnational feminist calls for reproductive justice must include adoption when investigating how the reliance on the reproductive labor of Black, Indigenous, and other women of color mirrors the shift in other forms of labor. This includes recognizing adoption as a reproductive justice issue. McKee expands on the analytical framework she put forth in her 2019 volume, Disrupting Kinship: Transnational Politics of Korean Adoption in the United States, including the mechanisms of the take, what she terms the transnational adoption industrial complex, and also what she terms the every adoptee and the adoptee killjoy in Adoption Fantasies. She looks at representations of Asian American women generally and Asian adoptees specifically to interrogate their fetishization as children and sexualization as teens and adults, and how white adoptive families fail to acknowledge, prepare, or defend their daughters against this violence. She writes, "Both constructions of these two figures, adopted Asian infants and adopted Asian women, rely on subsuming her as an object to be enacted on, a recipient of fantasy." Importantly, McKee also interrogates the field of Asian American studies for its dominant reading of Asian American adoptees as somehow less authentic subjects, largely circumscribed by their melancholia about their adoption in comparison to their non-adopted Asian American counterparts. Other scholarly books of note by adoptees that came out last year are In Reunion, Transnational Korean Adoptees and the Communication of Families by Sarah Doken Morgan, which was published by Temple University Press, and Out of Place, The Lives of Korean Adoptee Immigrants by Suna Layburn, also published in 2024. I have not had the chance to read either of them, but I'm really looking forward to them. I've heard great things about them. New fiction by adoptee authors that deals with themes of adoption directly or tangentially should not be discounted. Mariama Lockington's YA novel in verse, Forever Is Now, was published last year and won a Schneider Family Foundation Award for its depiction of a Black teenage girl struggling with debilitating anxiety disorder, exacerbated by a racist incident she witnesses in a park by police. The main love interest in the book is a Black transracial adoptee who's trying to come to terms with his identity, while falling for the Black girl next door. Korean adoptee Matthew Salesses has had 2 novels come out in the past 3 years, The Sense of Wonder and Disappear, Doppelganger, Disappear. And Taiwanese American adoptee Stephanie Valentine published her first novel, First Love Language, just a few months ago. Not to mention older sister, not necessarily related author, Korean-Canadian adoptee Jenny Haejin Wills released an acclaimed essay collection, Everything and Nothing at All, last year. It was a finalist for the 2024 Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction, among other awards. It has been a real education to both assemble When We Become Ours, a YA adoptee anthology, and hear the response to these 15 stories by BIPOC adoptees from BIPOC adoptee readers. Published in October 2023, When We Become Ours is the first anthology of short stories by adoptees about adoptees. Edited by myself and Nicole Chung, it features fantasy, sci-fi, contemporary literary fiction, horror, and even a graphic short story by Lisa Woolwin-Sijblom. I always describe the book as the one we wish we'd had as teenagers. At events and readings, BIPOC adoptees have approached me and told me what a relief it was to read a fictional story written by an adoptee with an adoptee protagonist, that they can really tell the difference. The writing is fantastic, but I just cannot read another super emotionally raw memoir that will cleave me, a South Asian woman adoptee told me at a signing. She felt that the fictional genre gave her the necessary distance to explore some themes of adoption. The memoir genre made it too close and too immediately painful. Her friend, also a transracial adoptee, agreed. A Chinese transracial adoptee at the same event shared that the book, quote, blew my mind because it contained the first story she had read with adoptee protagonist, and it contained a short story in her favorite genre, sci-fi, with adoptee protagonist, and that story is Stephanie Valentine's Almost Close Enough. I never thought I would see a character like myself in sci-fi, she said, which promptly put a lump in my throat. When We Become Ours is a 2025 Minnesota Book Award finalist in the new category of anthology. I'm going to end this talk by first asking for your grace and forgiveness for inadvertently overlooking the work of many excellent adoptee writers I have no doubt missed highlighting. Adoptees are a diverse, complex, and industrious group, producing important work in many fields that I unfortunately cannot completely track. So if I missed you and your fantastic writing in this literature review, know that it is probably because of time, space, and awareness limitation. I promise to endeavor to encounter and enjoy it soon. I'm going to conclude by reading the editor's note in When We Become Ours, because I think it's fitting for this moment. Dear reader, we've always been here. And yet when you're an adoptee, often the last thing you expect to encounter is your own story, any version of it in any universe. If you're a transracial adoptee, you may feel like an alien when going out to dinner with your white family. Patrons staring right and left, some of them bold enough to ask you outright, is that your brother, sister, mother, father? Or where did they get you? Reading the stories and novels assigned at school, you may feel invisible if no characters identify as adoptees, or you may feel misrepresented if they were adopted, and that fact is played for laughs or used to justify prejudice or cruelty. Or if you're like us, maybe you've encountered stories of adoptees that just felt off in some way, not really vibing with your own lived experience. Adoption shows up a lot in literature and pop culture. But most of the time, our stories are written by non-adoptees, white adoptive parents, white writers with no personal connection to adoption, and increasingly, non-adopted BIPOC folks. Storytelling matters. Storytelling can heal and it can bruise. It can make us feel seen and connected, and it can make us feel alone and strange. We know that adoptees need more stories by us and for us. We need the freedom to explore our very particular imaginations and identities on the page. The literary sci-fi, fantasy, horror, speculative, graphic fiction in this volume points to the complexity, breadth, and depth of adoptee experiences, though we know there are many more stories out there yet to be shared. Most of all, we hope that this volume will spark some flash of recognition in our adoptee readers, the knowledge that our stories have always been with us, waiting to be told and shared, processed and held. The only thing we needed was a forum and each other. This is when we become ours. Thank you.